Well, thank you everyone for being here today. Just before I get started, thank you very much for OpenIO for the invitation today. We had actually two talks today, one this morning with my associate, Stefan Lundell, who showed how to use our tool, and one short talk right now. Actually, I'm going to talk about subject we're not used to talk about. So one thing you need to know about Gatling is that we are a tech company. So we're more used to tech workshops or live demo. So today, it's the first time we do it. We're going to talk about management of load testing. So yeah, I forgot to mention, Gatling is the editor of a load testing tool. So load test basically is for simulating a huge number of featured users on your application. Does anyone already heard about load testing here? All right, this is new for you? Yeah? I will briefly explain it. So basically load testing for companies like e-commerce web shop, for instance, when they have an event like Black Friday, they're facing a huge demand on their application, and sometimes they crash. So this is what we try to avoid with load testing. You try to forecast this kind of events. There are also numerous situations where you can face a crash, and one is what we call at Gatling the Jean-Pierre Pernaut syndrome. So I don't know if everybody knows who Jean-Pierre Pernaut is. So he's a famous news anchor in France. I guess if you have startups, one of your dreams is to have your startups on national television, maybe in the news. But what happens most of the time is what you didn't expect is that a website or your application wasn't scalable, and it crashes. So you kind of lose the opportunity for people to know more about your application, what you're doing, what is your industry. Another unexpected situation for companies when they're facing bad performances, it's strike. So I'm not talking about strike because we're in France, but this is actually a situation we saw at a big insurance company in France. So the employees of the company refused to use the internal application because it poorly performed, and so they refused to use it on a daily basis. So these are the kind of situation you can face when you load test. One thing to know about Gatling, so we have a code-like approach. It has many consequences. One of them is that the tests are done now by developers. But one consequence we didn't expect is we created a real mess in companies. Because companies who know how to deal with load testing before, or who weren't used to this code-like approach, so you had many people doing different things at the same time. You even have different teams of developers doing load tests on their own, and they're all doing different things. But people started to ask us, what should we do? We didn't thought it was our job to deal with this situation, so we weren't expecting this. We were like, people are always resisting to change, so it's not our problem, so we just need to wait until they start resisting to change. Well, big news, it didn't happen, so people are still resisting to this kind of situation, and people are still asking us how to manage load tests. But before I give you some takeaways about our journey in Gatling, maybe take a look at load testing history. So load testing isn't something new, it's something that exists since the 90s. And here you have, well, you can't read it, but it was in a newspaper. It was the release of one of the famous load testing tool called LoadRunner. And at that time, so if you wanted to do load tests, you had to pay $70,000 to simulate 25 concurrent users. So it was a bit expensive, but it was really new. And how people did load testing at that time. So load testing exists actually in different industries. So you can see on the right side of the screen, this is a load test of a bridge. So load testing is something that everybody can understand. And on the left side, you can see traditional waterfall design of software development. And testing was one of the latest step in the development. So people were just doing one test at the end, one load test, just to verify if it works or not. So this is what we call the testers era at Gatling. But these tests were not done by developers. They were mainly done by a QA team or even by a dedicated team who only perform load tests. The problem is, when you do such a test only at the end of the project, it's a bit limited, because you can only say it works, it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, well, what do? You start over, or you try to find things to fix, but you don't have much time because it's at the end of the project. So it was one of the limitations of doing load testing that way. The other problem, it's this black box syndrome. So you have people doing load tests, but you don't know what they're doing. You don't know what their methodology is. You can question what they're doing. So you can challenge the reports. You can say if it's reliable or not. So this was actually one big issue in the testing industry. And people are still actually thinking about load testing that way. So we have many companies who's giving us phone call and saying like, well, my go live is in 1 month. Can you test it just to make sure everything works? And we're kind of skeptical because we don't know how to put it, because he will surely not like what he's about to hear, because we know so that in the report we will show that, well, maybe he should spend more time trying to improve his application. So what we did with Gatling, with this code-like approach, we integrated load test in the development pipeline. And one of our catchphrase at the beginning was by developers for developers. So this is really how we saw things at that time. But problem is what we saw, and we are get back to the first situation of the beginning of the presentation. There wasn't a strategy in the entire organization. You didn't have any proper methodology across the different teams. And, well, in a nutshell, you didn't have any harmonization. So here are a few takeaways we've learned from doing consulting for our users. So the first thing we learned is, so it doesn't have anything to do with the subject, but we are very bad at estimation at Gatling Corp. So we were always wrong. But we couldn't be right, because one of the first things we learned is people don't talk to each other among companies. I guess you've all noted that in companies. So what we recommend when we do consulting, when a developer calls us, the first thing we tell them, so you have to know your users. So you know the application, so you know how to craft your scenario, but you need to talk with your end users, you need to talk with your different business units, just to be sure how people are using your application, because maybe there are some aspects you don't expect. And finally, you don't need a lot of things to do. You must take a look at your Google Analytics to see how they behave. The second thing is to know your strategy. When you do load tests, you have to be aware of what your company is currently doing. If your company plans to have 10 more users in 1 year, you have to know this in order to test it. And one last thing, you have to design a methodology. Because what we saw in big companies, you had different features teams, different development teams doing tests on their own, and you can't really make them interact if they don't do the things the same way. One other thing is that load testing is a wide range of different tests. You can do really many things. You can do capacity tests, you can do SOC tests, you can do different things. So you have to know what you'd like to show. So finally, this is what we tell people. So Of course, we change our catchphrase, so the catchphrase isn't now by developers for developers, but it's load test everybody's job. So you have to specify user specification, and you need to be in touch with the business units and your users. You have to know a few numbers about your audience, and you need to work closely with your marketing department. And you need to be aware of any, I'm finished, that's my last slide. You have to be aware of your different communication campaigns also. And you have to talk with your top management. So this is actually what we do when we do consulting. We hang at the phone and we call all these different people. You have to know the forecast. You have to work with the testers to build a methodology. And finally, the developers can do the crafting. So you don't have any excuse to not do load tests. So thank you very much.